Hello, everybody. All right, January 17th. Here we go. Here we go. Now, these lives are a little bit interesting because I have people jumping in and out, and we'll see how this goes. But I just wanted to set us up today. I'm wearing a different color today because I noticed that for the past couple of days I've been wearing very dark stuff. So I wanted to make sure that that's not the norm because I like color. So it's kind of cool. This morning I had a great conversation with one of my clients, and I thought, you guys, I want to share this with you because what I love is, I work with people who are very passionate about what they do, and it's not always common. Like sometimes you find people who are just doing their job. Well, these people are not just doing their job. They're really passionate, and they've been doing this for many, many years. So they really want to push through and instigate change. And that's always hard because the minute you try to do something new, incorporate something new, launch something new, there's a lot of resistance to change. And most of us realize that now that's the norm and we expect it. In fact, if there is no resistance, and if people aren't uncomfortable with what you're doing or heavily resisting what you're doing, at least in part, I'm not saying everybody, but in part, then it probably means you're not doing anything really meaningful. So when there is resistance, that means that most times you're pushing the right buttons. Means you're changing enough for people to feel like they're being challenged, and that is good. That's how we grow. That's how we experiment, right? So I always suggest that and I know that that's something I've learned over the years, because things that I do are not necessarily mainstream. And also we're trying to change the way we do things. We're trying to change the way we teach adults. We're trying to move away from the model of, as Clark Quinn says, spray and pray, which is and then hope people, do something with that. We are actually trying to engage our learners. And especially when it comes to adult education, when people are in the workplace and we only have 15 minutes with them to kind of spark some kind of engagement and and maybe change their perception and to get them excited just enough to have them take on something on their own, because that's all we have is that 15 minutes. We will not be able to teach somebody anything relevant in 15 minutes. That is a myth, right? So what we really want to do is use that time as wisely as possible to give them the impetus to realize there's a way. Our job is also to provide them with resources that are extremely contextual and helpful, so that when they take on that journey of self-growth and all those other things, that whatever is available to them that we've curated, it's carefully thought through, and we've really made an effort so that their time isn't wasted. So that when we finally, let's say, like my optimal learning path is somebody's, just doing a great job, and then one day somebody sends them this link and they're like, "Hey, what do you think?" They open it up and it's a scenario. And the scenario says, "Oh, here's Jim, and Jim sounds very much like he has the same challenges as me, and he's struggling with something." I'm like, "Well, I already know how to solve that problem." You go through and you're like, "Whoa, Jim's the way Jim approached that and what happened, that was not how I would have done that. I wonder if there is a better way, because I usually stay away from those kinds of problems because they intimidate me." Oh, look. They're saying that they have a webinar or a workshop or a book that I could read that would help me with build this kind of skill. Let me see. Click another link. Oh, look, this is really contextual. I'm ready for this right now, and I can read it over the weekend, or I can access it on my phone as I'm, commuting back home. This is great. Oh, look, here's a person I can reach out to that will give me more insight, and maybe I can mentor with them, or there's a practicing group that I can join and work through this stuff, because I can relate to Jim in the scenario, but I have a couple more questions that are really more contextual to my specific office. I was wondering if somebody would be able to help me with that. So that's kind of how I imagine this journey. Like you're basically creating these little pockets and opportunities for people to plug in, and you have to make sure that each step of that plugin is really well structured and user friendly so that nobody's frustrated. Like one of the worst things is having this dynamite scenario, and people get excited and they're like, yeah, my I'm not as emotionally intelligent as I thought I was. I'm not as confident in pushing back when I see it, because I'm the kind of person who avoids conflict. Okay, I'm going to go into this awesome repository of how to build my own confidence modules, click through, and then I see just this mess of stuff. Nothing's organized. I don't know where to get started. Some of it is good, some of it is outdated. I don't know, right? So one of the things I always stress is, and it's funny because this usually happens when I go into a situation where I help people design scenarios, is I always look at the ecosystem that the scenario will live in. Because that one piece, even though it's fantastically awesome and contextual and does all those things, it's there as the impetus, and it's supposed to create that engagement and the aha moment for somebody to be like, yeah, I'm going to go and learn this awesomeness. And I'm going to find these resources. But, like you have to make sure that where they're going is actually also really good. So a part of the thinking that I do and the guiding and the coaching that I do is, what do the resources and the support materials look like? Because if we're driving somebody to a place where, our scenario is conversational, it speaks in their language, they understand it, and then we're taking them to a repository that has basically a bunch of documents in very formal legal language that they don't find useful or contextual, or it's not even in their mother tongue, we just lost that opportunity. So all those things have to be in concert. They have to talk to each other, and they have to complement each other, and they have to be well thought through. So it's kind of like, what's that user path? Imagine that experience. What's that going to be like? And then build the resources around it. So one of the things that we talked about with a client this morning, and I thought, this is really a cool application of scenarios that I hadn't thought of before. So I thought I'd share it with you, because I'm thinking that I'm sure there's other people using it this way, but I'm definitely going to use it this way, is that, let's say somebody is entering a learning repository. And if they're new, or they're already, fairly established in their role, they might only be looking for things that fill those gaps. But let's say there's other roles at their organization that they necessarily haven't heard of. And I think that usually happens to us, where we know, especially if you go to an institution to get your education, then you're like, okay, these are the roles that I'm aware of: doctor, lawyer, and whatever, teacher. But then what happens is you talk to somebody like a career counselor, and all of a sudden they open up your world to all these different things that are based on interests, and it just broadens your world. But what if you don't have that ability? What if you don't have that access where you were at to talk to somebody who's like, hey, what are you interested in? Or what are you really good at? Here's some options for you. So if you don't have that ability, or you want to scale this kind of opportunity for people, or this is what I came up with, if your organization is lacking in certain roles, and you know that you have a pool of people that could fill them, except you just don't have the ability to tap in each one on the shoulder and say, hey, is this something that would excite you, interest you, something you think you could invest the next 5 years of your life into? Because we're looking for these kinds of people. So instead of, letting that go, what you can do is create scenarios that are that have an aspirational context. So not necessarily that you're like, one day you could be the hero of the department. It's not like that, but more, let's say you have leadership roles that you really want to fill, and there's people in your company that would be great contenders for that. What you can do is create scenarios now that are, check out the life of, Jim, as he goes through his day. as this kind of role, as this kind of leader. And now here, check out the life, a day in the life of Susan, who's maybe a camp manager. And so what happens is, instead of people being only basically searching within their sphere of competence, right? Because they don't know what they don't know, and this is what they know. Now what you're doing is you're just kind of opening it up a little bit and saying, hey, here's something you could look at to see if it excites you. Also, if it's something you would consider, but also, especially I think for some of those really difficult roles, especially in the humanitarian sector, I'm thinking that there's probably a disconnect between what's being touted as humanitarian work versus what is actually happening in the field, and the difference between the two. Things like, nobody's ever going to tell you when you go on site, you might have to poop in a bucket for 2 weeks because there is no running water or other alternatives. So you might have to do that for a little while. Are you prepared? And so some of that disillusionment might come at the wrong time. So I'm thinking that if you have a day in the life and share some of the realities of that role, plus some of the wins, like, yeah, we didn't have electricity for 2 weeks, but we were able to get like 300 people food and shelter, and in a time where maybe there was an earthquake or something like that. And this is, really, we helped improve people's lives as a result of the work that we did and collaborated and brought out all this amazing magic that happens when people do work together for a common cause. Then, you can highlight the realities of that role and the benefits and downfalls, so that somebody who's maybe thinking about going down that path or never even thought about it now knows a little bit more of what to look forward to. And then if they're like, okay, well, I've seen this role, I've experienced this through the scenario, you can make it light. It doesn't have to be as intense as training or AHA training for a person who is in that role, but day in the life, making some real decisions. Then not only you're not replicating real life, it's not possible, right? But you are giving them context. And the context can lead to things like asking better questions, deciding that's not for you, or also definitely can say, if you are interested in this, if this is something you'd like to pursue, here's some resources, here's some people, here's some ways for you to get involved. That's what would be super awesome. Yes. So using scenarios as an aspirational path for people in your organization, or an aspirational path for people outside of your organization, as far as the day in the life of. And it's funny because they usually have these in when you have a job application, they always have kind of like a day in the life of this person. And it's funny because I think that those bullet points are not always, one, accurate, and two, representative of the role, which they always put there like, this is not representative of the role. But sometimes you actually want to know exactly what the reality is. And I remember once having this, applying for this position, and one of my requirements was I talked to somebody who would be a peer of mine in that department. And I said, okay, so I'm talking to this person. I said, so what does your day look like? And she said, well, it's meetings from when you start work to when you finish. And I thought, okay, so when do you get to work? She goes, well, it's mostly the meetings, and then you just try and fill in work in between. And I thought, okay, like for some people, they'd be like, okay, that's great. I get to collaborate all day, every day. This is awesome. And for some people that might be like, oh my gosh, I can't do that. So what it does is it gives you this reality perspective. I'm not saying that that's optimal, but it can be less of a shock. And by anticipating and being honest about those expectations, especially when it really matters, especially when it's really important that somebody understands the reality of the work and the job, they can more mentally prepare because they're willing to do the trade-off between what they want, the satisfaction that they get, plus the reality, plus, the decision making, all those things kind of fall into concert with each other. So I think that that's really important to share. So I hope you found that helpful, useful, and enjoyable. Maybe stirred up some ideas for you. And if you have any questions, please put them underneath the video, because I'd love to answer them and send them in, and maybe I'll address them in the live tomorrow or next week. And if you have questions about scenario design that you'd like me to handle more personally, like one-on-one, then book a call with me. It's called, go to scheduleanna.com. And there, basically, I'll ask you to fill in some answers or fill in a survey so that I can find out if I can help you right off the bat, and then I'll let you know. So I hope you have a wonderful rest of your week. I will be here tomorrow again, and enjoy. Take care, my friend. Bye.